Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio management. This is brought to you by PM Powered, a consulting company for project, program, and portfolio management. Without further ado, let's get going. Before I get into talking about the World Bank and some failed projects that they've had in different ways that there might be to actually do projects in developing countries, I wanted to talk about a article that I ran across by Bryce Welker. It's called Three Technological Changes Coming to the Project Management Industry. And Bryce, if you listen to this, I would love to have you on my podcast. Please contact me at wanda@pmpower.com. But as you know, in the past, I've talked about artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. Now, I haven't really talked about blockchain, but that's probably another technology that I need to become a little bit smarter on. But Bryce talks about all three of these in his article. And he says artificial intelligence, its ability to change entire industries and career, is a topic that has been thoroughly discussed. But what does he say about it in project management? And he talks about AI doing think about all the calls and messages you need to make on a daily basis as a project manager. Sure, some of those calls can be handled by personal assistants, but could he or she make 5 calls at the same time? So he's saying that AI, if you have a virtually realized virtual assistant like Duplex, could do the work of several personal assistants in a fraction of the time, freeing up substantial amount of time and energy to focus on more important tasks. Bryce, I would contend that it does even more than that. It could help you develop PowerPoints that you need to present to your stakeholders, to the sponsor, to leadership. It could also help you with risk management and many other things that are done on a daily basis at project management. It could help you analyze and do things as well. So Internet of Things is another area that he talks about. And he says, what does this have to do with project management? He says the most significant way that IoT affects project management concerns IT and conducting tests on software. I would say this is a little bit narrowed. There are many projects that are multi-million dollars or even $1 billion. And can you imagine all the data that's going on in there? If you have IoT analyzing all this data, then it can bring back to you and free up even more time so that you can do value add in analyzing this data. Can you imagine if you're on a multi-million dollar project or program or $1 billion project or program and it was doing the earned value for you? That would free up a lot of data for you. It would free up a lot of your time to allow you to analyze what's going on and look at the earned value and not having to actually do it. Blockchain. I'll have to concede on this to Bryce because I don't really understand blockchain that well. As I said, I have to understand it a little bit better. But he said that a survey conducted by Project Management Institute found that AI, IoT, and blockchain offer major competitive advantages to significant percentages of project managers that adopt them. It will take some time for project managers and their teams to adjust to this new way of verifying and transferring data. He's talking about blockchain. Most individuals will need additional education, as I have admitted I need, to properly wrap their heads around it. Several established jobs in the project team will fundamentally be transformed, if not eliminated entirely. However, this entire tumultuous transition will be worthwhile due to the major increase in productivity that follows. I totally agree with you, Bryce. I think we're going to see a major overhaul on how project management is done. But our tools have to follow through, and they have to incorporate blockchain, IoT, and artificial intelligence. And right now, it's very rudimentary how this is done, if done at all. There might be a little bit of IoT in some of the project management software, but there's no artificial intelligence and there's really not any blockchain. So thanks, Bryce. I enjoyed your article and I look forward to talking to you. Remember, contact me at wanda@pmpower.com. So let's change a little bit and go to the World Bank. The last few weeks I've been talking about different international development projects and their failures and even their successes. Well, I want to talk about World Bank and what it has done to governments and countries in developing, especially developing countries. And I would like to say that it's probably been more than a failure than a success, although the World Bank would not agree with this. So there's a um, it's the same article, but in two different sections, and it's called The World Bank Water Failure in Tanzania. And it talks about this little girl that has to walk kilometers to fill a 20-liter bucket so that her family has water, clean water to live during the day and to allow their livestock to drink as well. And she misses classes in the afternoon because there is no water close by. She has to carry the water. She has to walk all the way to this place and then back. And speak with Tanzanians today and you'll hear them describe an ambitious dream to shed the country's 60-year legacy as a third world nation and emerge as a thriving middle income one, despite allegations of culture of government corruption that has led donors to suspend close to $500 million in budgetary aid. And this is not unusual in developing countries that they have government corruption. Let's face it, there is corruption in many countries, even in developed countries within their governments. We hear about it all the time. So in developing countries, it tends to be a little bit more, and donors' money tends to be diverted and go to the actual project that it was going to. But anyway, this was a $1.42 billion project. That's B, not an M, but B, billion. And included $200 million direct support from the World Bank. And what they were doing is that they were putting, digging wells and pumping the water and having water pumps in various areas. And by 2012, in 2007, only 54% of these Tanzanians had access to what is called improved water source because the project failed. By 2012, it was expected to be only 53% of these water pumps that worked. And there's various reasons why it didn't. And if you take into account the growth of the population, it's even less of a percentage of wells that are working. And this is coming from the World Bank data, so it's not even someone looking at it. So coupled with Tanzania's rising population of 3.5 million, more Tanzanians lacked access to improved water than did before the project began. So in other words, it didn't even take into account the growth of the population in Tanzania. So there were other immediate risks of failing as communities find themselves unable to raise the money to fix and maintain them. So they made these water pumps difficult to maintain and to fix so that the people that thrived on these water pumps didn't know how to maintain them, didn't have the money to maintain them. And if they did have the money, they didn't know how to maintain them. So what happened is that this was outsourced, and the outsourcers didn't even have the knowledge to do it. So what's going on with all of this? So I'm going to go to the second part of this article, and it says, it goes on to talk about how there was a pilot project for one of these water pumps, and they dug the water, and then they turned on the pump, and it didn't work. There was absolutely no water came out of it. But yet they continue, instead of understanding what happened and changing the design of it, they continued with the same design. So the project continued to fail. Many of the pumps didn't work because the water pump was, the engineering design on it was faulty. Some of these pumps worked for 6 or 7 years and then stopped. Can you imagine a community that had relied on these pumps for 6 to 7 years and then all of a sudden their water was gone? This is catastrophic for a community. There was one pump where residents learned in 2004 they were slated to receive a brand new system, a WSDP pilot project. They were wary, but they rejoiced when the project successfully brought a source of water directly to them. But people were so happy they were dancing. The new system delivered water right to the center of the village, reducing dozens of hours each family spent going for it. So children were now going to school instead of fetching water because that's what the children did. This happened, like I said, for 6 years, and then it failed in the 7th year. Can you imagine how catastrophic that was? The nearest water source to them was 10 kilometers away. Another issue that is happening because they don't have clean water is that people are dying because without clean water, children die of diseases. Livestock dies because they don't have enough water, and they have dirty water as well because they die of disease as well. And they can't water their sources of eating, so they have crops that are failing because of this. One group that was had a pump and thought that they wanted to help was they were putting a tax of 20 shillings, or about 1.2 cents, on every bucket of water so that they could raise the $92,000 that they needed to put in a well. That's right, $92,000 to put in a well and pump. But if they were never going to be able to bring in enough money. So the Tanzanian government actually helped them, along with the NGO WaterAid, answer the call by furnishing them the $92,000 gift to build a new intake and replacing of the old pipes. But Lupita is just one of the many failures during the pilot program in phase 1 of the WSDP. According to Mimbangala, the WaterAid is no position to step and fix everyone. Can you imagine if they had to go in and fix over 58% of the wells, and it cost $92,000 each time to do that? It's a shame that this is happening, but there's nothing that we can, there seems to be no different way of doing it, but I'll talk about a different way of doing it in just a minute. But if you talk to the World Bank, they'll say at least 52% of the population does, remote population does have water. And that's something to say. Yes, it does have 52%, but it should be a 100%. Many times these water projects have very faulty designs, or they have very complex designs, and they don't teach the people themselves how to take care of it, and they don't provide them the extra parts to take care of it, and they don't have a place to go to get extra parts, and they don't have the wherewithal to buy the extra parts. So there has to be a program in place that allows these communities to be able to take care of themselves, and this has not been filtered into the Tanzanian water project. So overall, I would say it's a failure because it doesn't take into account the end user, which is the communities. The end users have to be able to fix. They have to be able to be trained. They have to be able to dig other wells and understand the technology so they can put in another water pump and be able to buy the information, to buy the pipes and the different contraptions that are needed to build these pumps. So World Bank, train the people, teach them how to do this. You can give a person a fish and they eat for one day, or you can train them how to fish so that they can get fish every day. So train these people to do it themselves, and they'll be able to have water, good, clean water, to provide to their communities forever. So let's go to some different things that the World Bank does. The World Bank goes in and they displace a lot of communities in these third world countries. And a lot of these communities have been on the land for many, many generations since the beginning of time, because this is their land. And in this article that I was reading, it's called World Bank Projects Leave Trail of Misery Around the Globe. When they are building dams and when they are building other water projects and stuff, they actually displace whole communities. And it talks about where one time this lady was forewarned that the government was coming in to burn down her house because the World Bank was getting ready to put in a dam in their area. She went and hid because she went and took as much as she could out of her little grass hut and went and hid with her son. And sure enough, there the government came and actually burnt down their community. Now, I don't want to say that the World Bank does this knowingly. They probably don't, and they admit they don't. And they also admitted that they have to put different things in place to help these displaced communities, because right now they turn a blind eye on it. So World Bank, you need to go in and actually do analysis on your own projects and do it with an open eye. Maybe bring in a third party to look at what your projects are doing to communities around the world and understand what you can do better to help these communities, especially the displaced ones. Excuse me. So finally, let's go to a different way. Excuse me, I needed a drink of water. A different way of doing international development. So international development projects, they're brought together, many different donors are brought together. It could be many different organizations and individual donors that do this. And they kind of work with the government, or they try to work around the government, but this is not failing. This way of doing it, it seems to be failing around the world. So what's a different way of doing it? And in this blog, it says, can a political economy approach explain aid donors' reluctance to think and work politically? And this is written by Neil McCulloch. So many times donors say it's too political. And what Neil McCulloch says is perhaps the main reason why political economy approaches are not widely used is the correct perception that they are, in some sense, meddling in the politics of the country. So when they're talking about political economy, they're talking about working with the government that's in place instead of trying to work around it. Most governments are generally not sympathetic to the idea of foreign governments funding political activities in their countries. And knowing this, most donors emphasize the benign, technical and apolitical nature of their work. So this is why the dominant form of political economy work is political economy analysis. Donors like this because it provides them some insight into the political dynamics of the country in which they work, so that they can assess the risks of their programs failing because they go against the interests of the local political actors. So in this political economy approach, you don't go against the political actors of the organization. What's the second part? It spends too little money. Although donors pursue particular development goals within the countries in which they work, they do so by spending public money. In practice, this means that each country is allocated a certain budget, and most of the practical activity of donor staff is associated with the mechanics of spending this money in a accountable fashion. Moreover, more important countries are allocated larger budgets, in part because the politicians of donor countries use the size of the budget to signal the government of the country the importance of what with which their country regards the bilateral relationship. So if you're in a larger country that has a large government, they want more money spent with them than they want to see in other countries. So the third item is it lacks an operational evidence base. A huge amount has been written about the political economy of development. However, the vast majority of it has been descriptive or analytic. Very little has been operational. An exception is ODI's work on a political economy of service delivery. Therefore, although there are some promising examples of success, such as the Asia Foundation in the Philippines, there's currently little solid evidence that taking a political economy approach actually leads better and more sustainable outcomes than a more traditional approach. And finally, there is no sanction for quiet failures. Donor projects sometimes fail, and I just talked about the one in Tanzania. Most donors put in place a complex architecture of processes to try to minimize the probability of failure. It's rigorous and lengthy design processes, regular monitoring, and independent evaluations. Yet despite this, it is extremely hard for most donors to determine the extent of success or failure of portfolios of programs that they fund in a country. In part, this is because measuring success is difficult since the situation, if the assistance had not been provided, is often unknown. So this to me seems to be that there's a lack of understanding of the end user and a lack of understanding the political reality of the organization and the country. So this needs to be looked at in more um, in more depth. And I don't want to try to say that I understand this more, but I would say that bringing in an independent third organization to oversee how the project was a success or a failure, and bring this to all organizations that do international development. And I'd like to see organizations work more together, have one be the program owner, because most of these are programs when you go into developing countries. They're not really projects. They have multiple projects under a program. So one organization like the World Bank or the World Trade Organization or the World Health Organization needs to be the overall program manager instead of having each of the organizations working independently of the others. This is breeding failure. And we need to understand those that have been successful. Why were they successful? Did the organizations work better in concert? Was there a donor that had a special way of looking at how their donor dollars were used so they were more successful? Let's bring this in to all the different organizations and breed success instead of having failure after failure. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio management needs. And this has been brought to you by PM Powered, your consulting organization for project, program, and portfolio needs. Please go to PM Current and make sure that you follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. I'd love to have you following me and understand what you would like to hear on these podcasts. Also, if you were a project, program, or portfolio manager on any of these international development projects and programs and portfolios, please or if you were a donor, please contact me at wanda@pmpowered.com. I would love to hear from you so that we can talk about this. There's many things that we could talk about, successes and failures, because there are successes out there in international development, and I'd love to hear from you. Again, I'm Wanda Curley. It was great to bring you this podcast, and I look forward to speaking with you next week. Have a blessed week.